Green Angel, pages 43 to 52. After that, rumors flew around quickly enough. There were those who swore that anyone who touched my hand would be visited by bad fortune. I didn't disagree. I wanted the looters to hear about how I could turn the luck of anyone who came near me. And who was to say I wasn't cursed? I lost my mother and my father and my sister, and sometimes when I caught a glimpse of myself in the shop window, I wonder if perhaps I hadn't lost myself as well. Every time I tried to say my name out loud, the words stuck in my throat: a black stone, a silver stone, a stone as white as moonlight. Before long, every shopkeeper on Main Street knew of my talents and my cloudy eyes. Even the looters, gathered under bridges and on street corners, were wary and stayed clear. In every store, people I'd known all my life hurried when I came to trade what I no longer desired for what I needed. They were forced to be honest with me, and they gave me what I'd come for: gold and silver in exchange for cranberry juice, white rice, bandages, brown sugar, salt, vitamins, coins and candlesticks for eggs, tins of baked beans, sugar, vinegar, laundry soap, candles. There were good people in town who were helping out their neighbors, and others who saw an opportunity for greed. Some people were busy cleaning the ashes out of the schoolhouse, while others were selling overpriced lanterns and oil and counting their profits. Honorable or not, most people were desperate for good fortune. Many hung horseshoes above their doors. They made certain to keep sprigs of rosemary nearby to protect them from evil. But I knew better. I was defended with my nails and my thorns. I wore boots with nails, a scarf of black thorns. One time when I was leaving town with my heavy backpack, a woman I recognized, a teacher of mine, called out for me to be careful on the road. She was kind hearted, and I remembered her lessons in language and history. But she wasn't my teacher anymore. I waved, but I hadn't learned anything new from her. I already knew that danger was everywhere. I took a different route home each time to ensure that no one would follow Onion and me. I favored paths so rocky and steep anyone else would have stumbled. It was the season when the earth turned red and yellow, when the whole countryside was blessed with orange light, but not anymore. Usually the leaves changed slowly: rubies, garnets, amber. This year they'd all dropped off at the same time. This was the season when my sister and I had gathered fallen apples from the trees in our neighbor's orchard. The old woman would chase us away, shouting and throwing stones that dropped harmlessly on the grass. Now, the orchards were bare, and the apple trees were as fruitless as fence posts. The hillsides were black, the road littered with garbage. Feral house cats living in the ditches would claw at any kindness, and Onion was so afraid of these wild cats, I had to carry him when they hissed and showed their claws. I tried to avoid the looters who had wrecked my garden. I heard they'd taken up residence near the river, at a place made out of half-dead timbers they called the Forgetting Shack. Some slept beneath bridges, but they all gathered at the fire they kept burning when the dark began to fall. I could smell smoke coming from their direction. When I held up my hands to the east, where they were gathered, I could feel their pain, a kind of pain that was much worse than what I did to myself with my ink and my pens. Once in a while, the looters arrived at a house in town in the middle of the night, threatening the citizens, demanding food. Most of them were no older than me. A few were only 11 or 12. They'd lost their parents, and one by one they'd run away from their empty homes. They drank gin until they were dizzy. They made themselves sick with whatever they found in their parents' medicine cabinets: tablets to make them woozy with dreams, pills that kept them up all night. I'd seen Heather Jones, the girl I knew who had joined them, panhandling on a corner. She had woven 100 braids in her hair, and she wore what had once been a beautiful white dress. People walked by without looking. They didn't want to see the emptiness in her eyes, but I put some coins in her tin. I didn't want her to thank me. That's not why I did it. It was because I remembered the white dress she wore, how pretty she looked in it. At school, how jealous I'd been. Now the fabric was torn from the brambles she slept upon. Now it was closer to gray. I could hear the looters every once in a while, music rising from down at the Forgetting Shack at the river. I felt protected by my bad reputation and the nails I hammered into the trees all around my house, a warning not to come near. But sometimes I'd wake in the night and I'd listen to their music. I couldn't help myself. Voices carried in the wind, and their voices called to me. Several times I'd left my sister in my dreams and risen from my bed under the table. The loneliness I felt cut right through me, and not even sleep could ease my sorrows on nights such as these. Help me, my sister called in my dreams, but I no longer went to her to help her carry water from the well, or sweep the floor, or close the window. One night, I went out very late. I made my way through the woods to see the forgetting shack for myself. I watched the looters dancing until their feet were bruised. Their bodies were covered with sweat. Some of them howled, and the sound went down my spine. Some of them spun in circles until they looked like spires of silver. Standing there alone, I swayed in time with the music. There were drums and tambourines. There was the organ they'd stolen from the church and the flutes they'd taken from the school music room. But this music was different from anything I'd heard before. It was something that scared me and made me want to be closer to it at the very same time. I thought dancing with the looters would be like jumping into the fire. I would never have to think again. All I had to do was join them, do as they said, follow their lead, forget everything that had come before. I laughed out loud at the notion, and my laughter made them turn to me all at once. The boys I'd gone to school with were all looking at me. Most of them had never noticed me before. Now I could probably have any one of them, if that's what I wanted. They were lonely the way I was. I could dance all night long with any boy I chose. I could forget right along with them. They started to call me as if they knew me. They started to come near. They thought I was Green, too shy to speak. Green, who had patience and pretty long hair. Green, who would dance with anyone who asked, anyone who grabbed her, anyone who pulled her closer to the fire. Leave her alone, a girl shouted. It was Heather Jones in her dirty white dress. She was drunk, but she recognized me. Does she look like she's one of us? Now the boys examined me closely. They saw the black roses and ravens on my skin. They noticed the nails in my boots and my clothes covered with thorns, so that anyone who tried to touch me would surely bleed. They ran from me then, as though I were the dangerous one. They went back to their fire as if they'd never even noticed me standing so close by. I went home, grateful to Heather for calling out. She knew I wasn't like them. I understood wanting to forget. Things that made you remember cut like pieces of glass. A song, a memory, a blade of grass, a white dress, a dream. All of it as painful as the deepest wound. I went home and locked my door. I was glad to be away from those pathetic creatures at the forgetting shack who didn't know how to face the darkness of their lives. That wasn't me. Heather Jones was right. I wasn't afraid of the dark. I didn't mind a certain kind of pain. I welcomed it because it took me away from my loss. It was better than anything at the forgetting shack. It was under my control. I took the pins and a bottle of ink and held them close. Every night I tattooed more black thorns, vines, roses, bats. When I had less skin to cover, the task grew more difficult. I turned to my fingers and toes, my instep, my thigh. I had to squint and take my time. I worked hard, far into the night. Once I fell asleep, still clutching my pins, spilled ink across the table in a dark and endless pool. Now, when I dreamed, my sister took my hand in hers. She was still like moonlight, but fainter, more sorrowful. She whispered something I couldn't understand. It was as if we spoke different languages, as if I were losing her, even in my dreams. The thorns on my skin were sharp and fierce like me. The thorns could pierce through any dream. I grew restless in my sleep. I took to avoiding it whenever I could. Green, my sister called to me whenever I grew so tired. I couldn't help but drift off. It was the only word she spoke that I understood. But I couldn't answer to that name. Instead of tears, there was soot in my eyes. So I called myself Ash. This was who I had become. But it was also the reason my sister stopped coming to me in my dreams after that. She didn't know me by name anymore, so how could she call to me? When I closed my eyes to search for her, I was a stranger.